Plato's Republic, right? And his fascination, as we've talked about it at learnstrong.net and all of our lectures on the Republic and Plato, this fascination with being strong, with being, well, here it is. Diet hard, blanket on the ground. Pioneers, oh pioneers. Passage 25 now. Has the night descended? Was the road of late so toilsome? We have to think about the road he's speaking about now as being the great Civil War where so many died. Did we stop discouraged, nodding on our way? Now this will of course be the word picture of soldiers who are marching, who are now so tired that they're ready to stop and maybe sit down. This will take us to our Dante and to Inferno. And you'll remember that passage 24 when Dante's finally had enough, you know? And he's had enough and he sits down and of course his guide Virgil will say, up on your feet. This is no time to tire. The man who lies asleep will never wake in fame and his desire. In that idea, in other words, here notice it's a rhetorical question. Are we already too tired? This will sound very much like Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. That question of, wow, are we going to survive what Lincoln calls us, we've said in our lectures on it, the test, right? Was the road of late so toilsome? Did we stop discouraged, nodding on our way? Yet a passing hour. That's what he calls the Civil War. It's just an hour in the history of our time. I yield you in your tracks to pause oblivious. Pioneers, oh pioneers. Till, final stanza, till with sound of trumpet. Now, I would say, he used the word minstrel earlier. I think this is Whitman saying, this is my role. Right now, he says, this is my role. That is to say, of our 5 Ps of Whitman, this is definitely Whitman the politician, definitely Whitman the poet, definitely the Whitman who says it's time to wake up. Till with sound of trumpet, of course we're using martial language again, far, far off the daybreak call, and then notice the dash here to remind us of our Emily Dickinson, right? Dash, hark how loud and clear I hear it wind. Swift, to the head of the army, swift, spring to your places. Pioneers, oh pioneers. And again, readers of Whitman's day, because they knew these poems, right, like Song of Roland, they know all about what happens at the end of Song of Roland with the blowing of the horn and all of that and the tragic end. The trumpet doesn't get there, the sound of the trumpet is not soon enough, if you will, and all of that. Well, what are we going to do with a poem like this at 2A? I think one of the major messages of a poem like this is the only way to is through. And of course we would say, well, that's true of almost every single epic poem. For Odysseus, of course, it isn't getting to Ithaca, although it is. It's, of course, the journey to Ithaca that matters. As we've often said, the journey will trump always the destination. And for Whitman, that's an important realization for both the individual, that it's not a matter of to, it's a matter of through. But it's also, of course, true of a collective, namely a people, of course, a democratic people that we'll call America, or Americans, right? No question. At 2B, not what Whitman says, but how Whitman says it. Well, the power of this trochaic meter is quite remarkable. It's quite rare. I mean, we don't see this very often. You can go back and look at Eidolons. Of course, Oh Captain, My Captain's probably the most famous. Now, Whitman was a contemporary, to jump to 3A already. Whitman was a contemporary of Longfellow, and as we've said in our lecture on Psalm of Life, tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem, na-na-na-na-na-na. Now, that was the poetry when Whitman published Leaves of Grass, which is why many considered Leaves of Grass not poetry. And Whitman said, normal people don't talk like that. I'm going to make my poetry using the human speech patterns so that people can read it afoot, lighthearted, I take to the open road. And yet, every once in a while in Leaves of Grass, he'll play around with these rhythms, and so we're pointing it out at 2B. Well, at 3A, I would be obviously grossly remiss if we didn't talk about one of our favorite novelists in 303, the great Willa Cather, and of course her classic 1913 novel, Oh, Pioneers, which is of course built very much off of this, that great story in Nebraska, and of course along with My Antonia, 2 of the great novels of the American novelistic tradition. As we've said, can't hardly do it better than Cather does it, right? I would also say that T.S. Eliot's East Coker Passage 5, and of course we've given full lectures on all the 4 quartets, and I've told you guys, I really believe this. I don't think you can read T.S. Eliot without knowing your Whitman, although he would have probably denied it, probably did deny it. I still think it's absolutely true. Hey, you remember this when he says this? Old men ought to be explorers. Here and there does not matter. We must be still and still moving into another intensity, a further union. I think very much that idea is encapsulated in a poem like Pioneers, O Pioneers. Well, as we've said in every one of these lectures, our goal is to try and own the text, make it our own. And so we'll ask a couple of 3B questions. What about this America that you guys now live in and are a part of? Have we become the corpulent sleeper, right? Or are we still okay with hard diet hard, and a blanket on the ground? What are you guys' thoughts on that? As you think about yourselves, have we become too soft? Would Whitman look at us today and say, it's kind of sad that the civilization we call America has now become very much like the civilization I was critiquing harshly? Maybe France he had in mind at the time when he was saying this about being kind of overweight and being sleepy. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you come down on this idea? How about this one, taking this text to a more personal level? In what way are you still a pioneer, a seeker, a journeyer? And with that in mind, we'll now move on to the next poem, to you and the opening lines, whoever you are, which is, of course, a formulation we're all together familiar with. I hope that this poem is challenging you. Thank you.